Hey dear viewers, thank you for joining me once again today. So as you have seen in the title below, today I'm going to be discussing or explaining the 3S method of writing poetry. The 3S method of creating poetry. So out there are a number of poets, and I want to believe you watching it right now, you are just going to be one of them at the end of watching this video. So I'm going to bring about a few ideas that can help you and me to begin a poem, to write a poem, and what things are we supposed to do when writing a poem. So let us begin now. So the first S stands for say the story. Say the story. So the first thing first, before you even begin creating your poetry, think of what you are trying to write. Try to narrate it in a certain way, that it won't sound so complex, in a certain way that you won't add any figures of speech. So at this point, you are just narrating a story, an ordinary story, as you would to any other person or friend of yours. So at this point, it's just a mere story that you are narrating to someone. No figures of speech added, no poetic devices added, and so many more other issues. It's just a mere story. So having narrated that story, the second S stands for say the inspiration. Say the inspiration. So now you have narrated this story to someone, a story without figures of speech, a story without any poetic devices. It's just as ordinary as it is. And now we are saying say the inspiration. And now at this point you are narrating this story in a very much inspirational way, different from how you brought it out in the first place. Okay? So someone is beginning to pick now the authenticity that is in the story. It's sounding now a little bit more real than it was when you just narrated it in the ordinary way. You are now adding some emotions to that story. You are now putting the most important points together to make it sound even more captivating to the listeners. Say the inspiration is the second ace. And lastly, we are saying shout the poetry. Shout the poetry. So by shouting, I'm not meaning shouting out loud, shouting out your throat. I'm just simply saying at this point now, having written your inspirational paragraph or narration, begin to add tone to your voice now. Begin to add some strength and enthusiasm. You are now writing an inspirational poem, a poem that is expected to capture people's attention even as you deliver it to the people. Okay, you're beginning to add some spices to your work, some figures of speech, and so many more other poetic devices. You're now beginning to make emphasis in your story where need be, and by the way you are sounding from your voice, people are able to note to say this is emphasis, this is a figure of speech, and this is something awesome. And so I'm going to do a demonstration just right away after this video so that people can clearly explain what we are trying to explain in this video. So straight away I'll do a demonstration. So here is the demonstration that will cover all the three areas we've described. And so it goes like this. I was looking at the mother as she was sadly looking at her child. The doctor was doing all he could to find the right treatment for the child. The mother had just gotten so tired to see how her own baby was suffering. So as you have heard, that's just an ordinary narration. There are no figures of speech added to it. There are no poetic devices. It's just a story I'm trying to narrate to someone as to what I experienced. Secondly, we said, say the inspiration. So I'll narrate the same story. I hope you will note the differences with how I narrated it in the first place. It goes like this. I was looking at the caring mother as she was sadly looking at her precious child. The doctor was doing all he could to fix the little baby's health. The mother had just gotten so tired to see how painful it took for a child to endure the suffering. The inspiration. So as you have seen, I've highlighted some words there. I didn't mention caring in the previous narration. I didn't mention precious. I didn't mention painful. I didn't mention endure. So we can tell to say this story is slowly becoming more inspirational. It's becoming authentic and captivating from time to time. Thirdly, we say you have to shout the poetry. So by shouting the poetry, pick the tone in my voice and note the difference with how I narrated the previous story. It goes like this. I was gazing at the caring mother as she was sadly looking at her precious child. The doctor was doing all he could to nail all the diseases the child had. The mother withstood all the songs and acts of suffering. She chose to stand firm. It was a tough and rough time for her. She had offered all her prayers to God, and yet fear still appeared to tear her apart. So you can pick the difference in the tone of my voice, in the emphasis I'm adding in some points, and in the language that I'm using in shouting the poetry. So I hope you've managed to pick the difference. So even as you sit down to write a poem, you can just simply draft a story, a narration. Then as you proceed to write that story, you begin to add in some components to it that will make it sound more inspirational. And finally, you will make a poem that will have certain areas of speech, figures of speech, to have emphasis. Your voice will be able to communicate a certain message to your audience. There will be that tone that will be picked in your voice, that strength and enthusiasm. So that was the 3S method of creating poetry. Even as you sit down to write, think of the 3S method of creating poetry. I believe you can become a great poet. You can inspire many lives. So go ahead and write that amazing poetry. Thank you so much for staying with me towards the end, and stay blessed.